When it comes to things like immigration, dealing with the environment, are these just new issues for our country? Think about that with us today. Hi, my name is Mike Dyes. Welcome to Weekend Connection. Now, let's get connected. David Barton is the founder and president of Wall Builders, a national pro-family organization that presents America's forgotten history and heroes. David was named one of America's 25 most influential evangelicals by Time magazine. He's the author of numerous best-selling books. One of his most recent books is called U-Turn, co-authored with George Barna. Welcome, David, once again to Weekend Connection.
Hey, thanks for having me. Great to be with you.
Ecclesiastes 1 says, "The thing that hath been, it is that which shall be, and that which is done is that which shall be done, and there is no new thing under the sun." Well, today we consider a wide range of current events that may not be unique to our times after all. For instance, what did the founders of America say when it came to gay marriage? Did they struggle with issues like that? How about illegal immigration or rioting in the streets over racially charged incidents? I appreciate your extensive knowledge of history and founding events of America, the things that we often don't hear about except through sources such as Wall Builders. You spent years researching our founding fathers. You have many of the documents from the early years. And let's talk, first of all, let's just go to one of the hot topics of the day, gay marriage. Now, did the founders have to deal with this issue back when we were founding the country?
Yes and no in some ways. There's a couple of approaches, and let me kind of back up to say you're exactly right. Ecclesiastes 1:9, there is nothing new under the sun. It changes from generation to generation with technology, but not with the issues. And so, as I jump back, and by the way, we own 100,000 documents from before 1812. So I own thousands of the handwritten documents of the founders of the country, Washington and Adams and Jefferson, etc. And you do find that there's nothing new under the sun. For example, they specifically dealt with the abortion issue in their day. There's a book on abortion in America from 1808. They took a very clear position. Now, technology has changed, but abortion is not. There are people who don't want to be pregnant once they get pregnant. So this is not a new issue. So whether it was that or the original ban on homosexuals in the military was instituted by George Washington in March of 1778. I mean, we thought that was the deal that came under President Bill Clinton in 1994. No, It came in with George Washington, and Bill Clinton reversed George Washington's position. But there is nothing new under the sun. So to go to the gay marriage issue, there's two ways of going at this. Number one is you have to understand what the Founding Fathers thought about homosexuality, first off. And in the law books of the day, it is exactly what it was called in Romans 1. It is unnatural. And that's why they called it a crime against nature. And by the way, up until nearly 15 years ago, the U.S. Supreme Court still called homosexuality a crime against nature. The Declaration said that our laws have to be built on the laws of nature and of nature's God. And so not only is it wrong in the laws of nature's God, the God who gave us the Bible, not only is homosexuality wrong, but it's also wrong in nature. More than 10 million species in nature. Only a couple of species have anything with homosexuality, and even in those species, it's not a lifestyle. It's always an aberration. So that's why it was called a crime against nature. So first off, their view on homosexuality is this is wrong. As a matter of fact, they believed, and there's a great legal writing, that if you come to believe homosexuality is correct, you will have lost your moral view on nearly every other issue. You will believe that there's no problem with adultery, there's no problem with all sorts of other behaviors. If you get to the point where homosexuality is correct, then traditional morality is absolutely gone, and you cannot survive as a nation. So that was their first view. The second view was, and it's the laws of nature and nature's God, going back to that 8-word phrase in the Declaration, if something has been laid out in these scriptures, civil government is not allowed to contradict that. And so on the issue of marriage, they said, look, God has defined marriage, a man, a woman, a lifetime union. Genesis 1 through 3, Jesus reaffirmed that in Matthew 19, 1 through 15. It's settled. Government is not allowed to redefine what God defined. And so in case after case, there's a great Supreme Court case out of the Texas Supreme Court in 1913 called Grigsby versus Reeve. They said, whoa, they said marriage, God created marriage. Civil government can't redefine something God's created. You're to render to Caesar what Caesar's, to God what's God. That's not our jurisdiction. So they had a very clear position on both homosexuality and marriage, and you do not redefine marriage because that's God's institution. Government's not allowed to steal something that belongs to God.
I'm shocked at how quickly public opinion has changed on that issue, and how if you dare to make a public statement, especially a celebrity, a sports figure or something, how quickly you are criticized and jumped on. And well, as I say, we're trying to get to a variety of issues. So let's move to another one. There's a lot more we could say about that one, but how about immigration? Did the Founding Fathers, back when it was just 13 colonies and then just a new country, did they deal with illegal immigration back then?
They dealt with immigration a whole lot. As a matter of fact, you'll find that in the Declaration of Independence, one of the 27 reasons they gave for separating from Great Britain was that the king was trying to stop immigration. But it was always legal immigration. Illegal immigration didn't exist per se in the way that we have it today. The belief was that an immigrant is welcome to be part of the country, but you have to live by the laws of the country. You have to live by the culture and custom of the country. And the other interesting thing about immigration is it was not a federal issue. When you came to the United States, you're not going to live in the United States. You're going to live in Maryland, or you're going to live in New York or somewhere. So the states are the ones who set the immigration standards, exactly opposite of where we are today, where we're told, oh, no, Texas, you can't do anything with the border. Arizona, that's federal stuff. Not so back then. As Thomas Jefferson points out, the responsibility of the government on health care and immigration was to make sure that those who came into the United States were healthy when they arrived, and then past that they have to conform to state laws on immigration. So it has really shifted. That was a 10th Amendment issue in the original Constitution. And so they were very clear. For example, if you look at Maryland's immigration, to be a citizen of Maryland as an immigrant, you had to agree to embrace Christian principles. In other words, you got to agree that murder is wrong and the Ten Commandments are right and perjury is wrong. And so they had all these cultural conditions to come into the country. And if you want to meet that, man, we love immigrants. We want immigrants. You just got to live according to the culture and customs. And so that was the way we handled immigration back in the beginning.
We're talking with David Barton, founder and president of Wall Builders. Now let's go to homelessness. Now that's something that we have spent a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of effort on trying to help people who are in poverty, and especially those on the streets, living on the streets. Did the Founding Fathers have to deal with homelessness?
They did. They had to deal with homelessness, and they had to deal with poverty, and they had to deal with a lot of the issues that we deal with today. And it's interesting to see the way they went at that. From a biblical perspective, you see in the Bible that the Bible gives more than 200 verses telling us to take care of the poor. So that's a big emphasis in the Bible. But what you find is that if you list all those verses, which are directed at the family to take care of the poor, which are directed at the church to take care of the poor, and which are directed at government to take care of the poor, there's only 3 verses that deal with the government and the poor. And it says when the poor come into court, make sure they get justice. Don't treat the poor different from the rich. Make sure they're all treated. The meeting the needs of the poor was always the responsibility of the church and the family. More than 200 verses. It was always that way. And that's why back in the Old Testament, God says, okay, you landowners, when you harvest your wheat, you round off the corners of the field, leave the wheat standing in the corners because that's for the poor. If you've got a vineyard, when you pick the grapes, anything that hits the ground, you don't pick it up, and you don't go back up your vineyard a second time. If you skip grapes, you leave those for the poor. Here's the deal. The poor had to go in and harvest the wheat that was left and pick up the grapes that were on the vines. They had to do something for it. The priest was required to go into the home of the poor and look at it and say, yeah, you need help for about 3 months here. We need to give you about 60% income. It was always considered temporary help till they got back on their feet. There was never a permanent view of poverty. It was always temporary. So the Founding Fathers held the same view. And the way they dealt with the poor was you had vestries, and that's what the church had, was you divided the county or the state into vestries. George Washington was a vestryman, Thomas Jefferson, and that meant they had to go out and visit the poor, see how much help they needed, and made sure they got local help and that those poor were accountable for what they did with that. Ben Franklin has a great statement. He says, I'm all for helping the poor, but he said from the government standpoint, you want to drive the poor out of their poverty. You don't want to make them comfortable in their poverty. And so he criticized Great Britain because they were taxing the people to take care of the poor. He said, what you will do is create a permanent class of poverty. You'll get no productivity out of there, and they will be ungrateful for the help they receive. So the American view, very different from the European view, was the biblical view. You get lots of help, but it has to be tied to work. Today, work is no longer an aspect of poverty and welfare, and we have 80 anti-poverty programs in America today. Last year, when you take all the money we spend in those 80 programs, divide it with all the poor in America, they average $61,000 per family with no work requirement. You now find that if you're on welfare in America, you make more than teachers in 11 states. You make more than secretaries in 39 states, which is why 92 million people just a few weeks ago said, we don't even want a job. Why would you want a job if you can get $61,000 for a poor family? So that's why the Founding Fathers were totally on the other side. They took the biblical position that charity belongs to the church, it belongs to the families, not to government, and you want to drive the poor out of poverty, not keep them comfortable in poverty.
It's compassion, but looking at it as a short-term problem that you're trying to help them get out of.
Yeah, and you know, it was real interesting, too, that Ben Franklin, all the Founding Fathers are very generous with the poor. And Ben Franklin, when he gave charity to the poor, would say, now, you take what I've given you, and once you get back on your feet, you give that to someone else who's poor. They always put a responsibility on the poor to turn around and help others who were poor. It was not just a receiving mode. You learned to receive so that you could turn around and give. And that's the way you build a healthy culture, is make people productive rather than make them self-receiving and egocentric.
We're talking with David Barton, founder and president of Wall Builders, co-author of the book U-Turn. I have one I was thinking about, and I have never heard this addressed that I can think of from the viewpoint of the Founding Fathers, but we hear so much about global warming and the environment. Were they dealing with anything in that realm back then?
Well, they had environmental-type problems, and this is an interesting thing that we found out in the book U-Turn, is that Christians today do not associate weather with God. Matter of fact, 52% of Christians say that they think God does a really lousy job of taking care of the weather. So back in the founding days, if something was going on with the weather, man, you got a hold of God in a hurry. And you will find that whether it was the Pilgrims starting in 1623 when they declared for them colony-wide day of humiliation, fasting, and prayer because the weather was being strange, all the way through the Founding Fathers, all the way through Abraham Lincoln, they keep tying the weather to several things. I mean, it could be that they thought, hey, God's not blessing us because we got too much sin in the nation, and when God doesn't bless you, the Bible teaches that he changes the weather patterns. And so the Bible is clear of weather patterns. The prophets talked about all that all the time. Because you sinned against God, that the heavens are going to dry up, it's going to get hot, things will be parched, scorched, or you get too much water, you get floods. So the whole viewpoint of weather was built by the Founding Fathers around the fact that God is the one who controls the weather, not us. And that if we're having trouble with weather, we got to get a hold of God, and He'll show us what to do. So now we think God has nothing to do with the weather, and in fact that He does a lousy job of handling the weather, when we should be saying, you know what, maybe God's trying to give us a real clear message here through what's happening around us, making us uncomfortable, and we're not responding. So weather and God and Bible and humans and government, I mean, that's not a new issue for the Founding Fathers. That's something we've been dealing with for a long time.
Well, let me throw out one more. I had not gotten to my whole list, but I was just curious. When it comes to gangs, that's something that is widespread now. Even in a small town, you might have a gang. Was George Washington dealing with anything with gangs back then?
Yeah, they considered it lawlessness, and the solution for lawlessness was religion and morality. As a matter of fact, when you had gangs running, and there were gangs because you had, you got to remember, in early America, the average lifespan was 33 years old when they signed the Declaration of Independence. People are dying all the time. We have none of the medicine we have now. And so you have so many orphans and so many kids without parents because parents have died and life was tough. And so you have that situation. But the difference is that we had a lawful culture, and we raised kids in a culture that even if the parents weren't there, we still promoted religion, morality, and responsibility and respect and serving others and not yourself. And that makes a big difference. One of the great examples I love to point to is a founding father named James Kent, who is considered one of the two guys responsible for the American system of justice, the American jurisprudence system. He was over all the courts in the state of New York back in the founding era. And he was absolutely appalled at all the murders and lawlessness that they had in New York. And what he records is over a 16-year period in the state of New York, they had 8 murders in 16 years. That's a murder every other year. And they were appalled at the lawlessness that represented. Chicago's got a murder every 8 hours now, and we just blink and turn our head the other way. So for them, yeah, they saw gangs, but the preventative was, and by the way, that's another reason folks don't know, but that's a reason Sunday schools got started in America. Sunday schools were started for inner-city youth who did not have parents to make sure that they were grounded in the Bible. Sunday schools were to teach you the Bible and to teach it to inner-city youth who were without parents and living very tough lives. So that's where the Sunday school movement got started, and that's why gangs, that's how they diffused gangs, was through the Word of God and teaching God's principles.
Well, I did not stump him. That was David Barton. He's the founder and president of Wall Builders and co-author of the book U-Turn. David, how can listeners find out more about the founders, the founding documents, about some of the solutions to the problems, find out more about what you're doing at Wall Builders?
The easy way to connect with us is wallbuilders.com, and when they get there, they will find that we have posted thousands and thousands of those original documents of the Founding Fathers so that folks can scan them and read them for themselves. A lot about religion, morality in the Founding era, and a lot about these issues we're talking about today are on the website as well.
David, thank you for sharing with us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. God bless you for all you're doing.
My name is Mike Dyes. Friend, thanks for joining us. Join us again next week for Weekend Connection.
Thank you for listening to this feature, a production of BBN, the Bible Broadcasting Network. BBN provides 24-hour Christian programming, great Christian music, and Bible teaching. Listen to BBN by clicking the link in the description.